Hi, friends. Welcome to our conversation for With You Wednesday. I'm here with our beloved Duke Miles. We know Duke in the capacity of being our incredible organist and one of our musicians here at First Church, but he has a whole separate life and a whole separate vocation. And I've invited him here today to talk to us about the importance of paying attention to our mental health. I know that a lot of times in religious communities, especially in the past, mental health is not brought up as a topic of importance or regarded as something to care for or tend to. But we here at First Church do understand that mental health and mental illness is something that a lot of people struggle with. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not a taboo topic, but in fact is something that Scripture wrestles with again and again. And we know that in this time of social distancing and isolation, that our mental health is being stretched in ways that can be quite uncomfortable. And so it's important that we pay attention and we care for ourselves and care for our neighbors. And so, to that end, I'm going to let our friend Duke introduce what he does when he's not at our organ and talk to us about how we might tend to our own mental health and the mental health of those we love and care for. So, thank you for being here, Duke.
Thank you, Taylor. It's a delight, as are all of my associations with First Presbyterian. Every time, just love all of the Presbyterians. Yes. So just by slight introduction, after I had taught piano for 17 years at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, I decided I wanted to do something different. And I had been in a lot of therapy. And I say to my clients, when they say something about therapy and how long you might need to be in therapy, I said, well, for me, it was 30 years. I don't know what course it's going to take with you. And so after teaching a long time, I thought about what else I might like to do. And like a lot of people, honestly, who have been in a lot of therapy, I thought, well, maybe that could be it. So I did a master's in social work and totally changed my life. And I've been a therapist since 1994, first practicing in Savannah. From Metter, as most of you know, and Michael and I decided we wanted to move back to the farm, so here we are, and I'm practicing in Statesboro, which is all just sort of fallen into some sort of place that I don't understand, but it's worked.
We're glad it works.
It's worked, and it is so wonderful to be able to play, and playing at First Presbyterian has really kept me in that world in a way that I wouldn't have been, and I am so grateful for it. And it too was pretty coincidental. Dan Lewis and I were moving a sofa into the office that Susan and I shared, and he started talking to me about needing an organist at First Presbyterian. Voila. However many years later, here I am. So that's sort of that story. And yes, I work as a therapist every day, and have been really grateful that I could continue to work with people during this time through video therapy, and some just plain old-fashioned phone therapy works for some people, but I've been able to stay in touch with my clients, and that's been very meaningful for me and important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would love, since you have been still providing care in this time of crisis, and you've been with people in times of upheaval and trauma before, if you could talk about some things that those that both have had struggles with mental health and mental illness in the past, and also things that other people might be able to look out for, some signs or some habits that that might that might warrant us saying like, "How are you?" or "Tell me more about what's going on with you," so that we might care for each other in a more tender and observant way.
Mhm. Um, you know, one of the things that is true is that we're all sort of on a new playing ground,
Mm.
and I've been looking for ways to express that and to think about that. And I found an article recently by Gary Greenberg, and title of the article is "Therapy Under Lockdown. I'm just as terrified as my patients are." And one of the things I liked about the article was that he said, you know, this is new for all of us. To quote, he says, "Despite our dams and cities, weather forecasts, medicines, knowledge of scientists, we aren't safe from this pandemic. And while global warming or nuclear holocaust seem theoretically under control of humans, this is not. This is a virus." Um, and he goes on to say that the best we can do to help protect ourselves and those we love is to distance from one another when we need one another most.
Mhm.
And so it's been very important for me that I could connect with people, with my clients that I love and care about. And I have really enjoyed being a part of the services at First Pres, and listening and noticing the creativity that you have brought to this incredible time in order to stay in touch with our congregation. I think that's been so important. Because there is this incredible challenge. You know, I haven't seen my grandchildren since before Christmas, except I can see them on a screen. And so, you know, thank God for that.
Absolutely.
To kind of get back to your question, I think what we have therapy for years is that there are four basic emotions: I'm mad, sad, glad, or scared, or
Mhm.
synonyms thereof. And to that we might add shame and guilt. And I've thought a little bit about how those two may apply to this, and which is tricky. Um, but I think that the first thing we have to do to answer you is be aware of what it is we're feeling.
Mhm.
And I think in order to do that, we have to get still. And that's easier for some of us than for others. And we have to get still with an open sort of stillness.
Mhm.
And so I am a big fan of all of the YouTube meditation that is just, all we have to do is just punch a button and there it is. You know, a 30-minute progressive relaxation, or someone leading us in a meditation. And you can basically choose the variety that you want
Mhm.
because there's so many of them. But I think the first thing we have to do is somehow come face to face with what it is we're feeling.
Mhm.
And I think most of us, interestingly, I'll detour a bit and say that when you asked me to do this, Taylor, you said, "Are you interested?" And I wrote back and I said, "I'm not sure interested is the word, but I'm absolutely willing." And I was taking Wilbur, the golden retriever, for one of his 2 drives a day on Sunday. And I thought, you know, you probably need to think about this a little bit before you try and do this with Taylor. And so I had that moment to pause and to think. And I thought, you know, this is a little bit different to talk about in its totality. from what I do with clients when
Mm-hmm.
I deal with what they bring.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know what, you're scared of this and you're scared of thinking about it. And so, yes, there it is, the emotion of fear, and what do we do about it? And one of the things that I think I talk about over and over is how fear can harm us more than what it is we're afraid of.
Right.
And so when we start pulling it apart, and when we start using positive self-talk, which is number one, in dealing with some of these difficult emotions, what do I tell myself about my fear?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so important to think a little bit about, well, what am I going to say here? And how do I judge where I am on the scale of optimism versus pessimism?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a place I can move? Can I make a list, for instance, write down the positive advancements that have happened? Since we started this, it seems like years ago, and it hasn't been very long. And,
5 years.
a lot of progress has been made. And we do know a lot, and we are having some success, many of us in isolation. And so looking at these other emotions and looking at the anger,
Mm-hmm.
can I face that? And can I admit I really am angry I haven't seen my grandchildren? And I'm really, and I'm angry that we cook at home every single night while it's my preference. And goodness, sadness, so huge. And realizing that we have to observe and acknowledge our sadness when we're watching the absolutely terrifying and incredible grief that people are going through in so many parts of the country, and not so far from us. And so I talk a lot about distraction, but in my mind, distraction has to come after knowing what it is I'm feeling. Because if I'm just involved in blind distraction, I could probably get myself in a whole lot of trouble, because it usually means I'm running from something.
Right.
And so for me, Taylor, it's really important to come face to face with what my feelings are, and then take control of my ability to distract myself.
Mm-hmm.
And already using that word in a positive sense, I think is important, because it's enough, Wilbur. Thank you. I think that we feel so helpless. And I think helplessness is such a huge part of the emotional palette in this situation. And so if we can find ways to give ourselves some power, I think it can be so very helpful. So yeah, we all distract in different ways, and we know the healthy ways to distract. And so I think there's a continuum. I think that continuum exists between people I'm talking with who really cannot be still, who are literally moving every moment. And so if I'm doing that, and if I find myself getting into that, I need to notice it. I need to be aware that I may not be physically able to stay involved in home projects day in and day out and rebuild half the house.
Right.
The other end of the continuum is a lot of us go through periods of time when we really basically want to numb out.
Right.
And never have I watched so many Netflix shows and binge watched so many shows, and thank goodness for it.
Right.
And then I have to remind myself, okay, well, maybe you're a little too far on this end of the continuum. Maybe you need to get up and go for a walk. Mm-hmm. Or, I think one of the things that is so incredibly important is getting some kind of exercise. And maybe the exercise, as important as it is, has an equal partner in just being outside, feeling the air, feeling the sunshine in these glorious days that we've had.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what I hear you saying too is that there's no shame in watching the binge watching of television, but it's paying attention to the catalyst that got you to a point where you feel off balance, right? So it's saying like, oh, this is probably more than usual. I'm not going to shame myself. I'm not going to judge myself. I'm not going to go into a negative self-talk. But I'm going to just stand back, maybe observe it from the outside, or like pick up look underneath the carpet to see what's there. Right.
Right.
Our house has been really messy because we have 4 humans, a dog, and we now have 6 baby chicks that live in our house. In a box, but like, it's just...
That's delightful.
It is. But Hank, yesterday, I was on the phone with a friend and I'm sweeping. And Hank said, "Why do you always broom when you're on the phone?" And I realized it's because I am... I did exactly that. Like it made me stop and think, why am I doing 2 things at once?
Yes.
And
yes.
It's because I'm so, like, the house is dirty. That makes me anxious. I figure I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. No one is bothering me.
Right.
Like I can, and my best friend Anna doesn't care that I'm sweeping because she's doing the exact same thing as like, but that awareness, and sometimes I think we need other people to point that out for us, right? And so I'd love if you could, and like sometimes out of the mouths of babes, right? Like, I'm glad Hank called me out on that.
You're brooming.
I'm brooming. So tell me, like, what are some things that we might put in our conversation toolbox when we're talking with folks, people that either we share a space with at home or we're on the phone with or video conferencing or even writing a note to, that might prompt that open stillness or that pause in them, or might just open a conversation that sometimes is more difficult to have, frankly, in person, that this actually affords us the space maybe to have a conversation we wouldn't have had. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we're
Absolutely.
able to, there's kind of a protection. And so we can kind of take a risk on saying, you seem kind of distracted. Tell me more about that. But are there some phrases or things we might be able to start using in our own conversations with people we love to prompt these kind of awarenesses? Or, yeah.
So it all depends on the relationship, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And so I think you're talking about, for the most part, when you get very specific, you're talking about relationships that are very strong.
That's true.
Very close friendships or family members that you're very close to.
Well said. It's very judicious. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I appreciate about my experience with my Presbyterian friends is that you guys are really good with boundaries. You know? And
Is
I'm
that one way to call us the frozen chosen, or was that just like
no, it's a real compliment.
a
You
thing?
don't wait. You're careful about wading into other people's business, and so I would venture to say most of the folks I know at First Presbyterian are really good at subtlety, and so I would start with. I mean, to anyone, you can let the conversation drift to how are you dealing with all of this, and then we can talk about ourselves a little bit. And I had the worst day a couple of days ago, if that's true. And what that was like is, I got so sick and tired of watching those same Netflix things, and I needed something different, and I couldn't think of anything different to do. And so giving people things to catch hold of, to get them to begin to talk about their own experience. Now, I think what you're also talking about is if you have a really good friend, you know that this person might have dealt with lots of anxiety and or depression in the past, or any other kind of mental health issue. Yeah, maybe blatantly saying, have you been depressed? And just leaving it and seeing where they'll go, or something that really is pretty out there. And just ask the question. I've been thinking about you. I know you've had difficulty with depression in the past. What is this feeling like for you?
Right. Yeah, and because I do think, like as someone and I think I've been honest about this before from the pulpit or in conversation, is like I've struggled with depression at various stages of my life since I was a teenager, and it is something remarkable to a friendship and a relationship when that beloved person says to you, seems like you're having some signs of depression again. Let's talk about that. Because it feels like an invitation and a freedom that, for whatever reason, like I know what it is, but to have someone else name it who I trust. And I think that for those people, for a lot of people who might not raise their hand immediately and raise the white flag that they need help,
Mm-hmm.
to have someone else say it is such a gift. And I think it's been a gift for me in the past, but I think it is a gift of friendship and intimacy and invitation, because it's an automatic safe space that's created for you. And if you don't feel like you have a safe space, then all of a sudden here's one person who sees you for what's really happening. And of course you have the agency to say, I don't want to talk about that right now, but you know that
Absolutely.
door's been opened.
Absolutely.
And that is a game changer, I think, for so many people, to know that the door's open. They might not be ready to walk through it, but that door's been opened. And so when they're ready, they can walk through it.
And absolutely, you're right, because you may say that and they may pull back,
Right.
and they may call you a day later and say, when you said that, I really wasn't honest. And I also think that in whatever way it feels appropriate, to just let people know that that we're doing therapy, we're doing teletherapy, and there are people who have learned to Zoom that would tell you they would never have learned to Zoom. I'm one of them, and there are lots of other modes. Frankly, I find FaceTime probably clearest and easiest. And right now, HIPAA has been very understanding that we have to be in contact with people best way we can. And for some people, as I said earlier, it's plain old telephone, and that's okay too. So if you're not comfortable with any technology and you need a therapist, you can have a therapist during this time. And if there's anyone out there who needs help, I will be more than happy to try and find someone.
That that's
Or
really helpful because I wanted to say here are some local resources, and I think if people can email you and you can point them to other folks or general practitioners are available for resources, like that's part of their job. So if you feel like you're having a great deal of anxiety that you haven't had before, or you need to talk to someone, right? People can tell a doc their GP, and they could say,
right,
here's some
right,
references, right?
right. I will say that it is a time when if you have thought that you might need medication, you really may need to talk about that with your primary care physician, who may or may not decide to refer you to a psychiatrist, because many primary care people prescribe medications
Right.
that can be very helpful.
That's right. That's right. And to have no shame in that. We're in a brand new world, and everyone's been catapulted into it. And like you said, Duke, we're only 5 or 6 weeks into this. Like we're still learning and navigating this new space. And so if you feel unmoored or anxious or angry or afraid or sad, like those are all very normal responses to sudden trauma and sudden jolting of what was. So, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any final words uh, of encouragement or hope for your friends here at First Church?
I think that staying connected and celebrating success as often as we can, and some of that success is what we're doing today, and seeing the incredible good in human beings and focusing on it,
Mm.
like like what the healthcare workers have been doing in New York. And if you haven't heard the 7 p.m. Um, horns, and one of my New York friends actually stepped outside and recorded it for me one night, and it was overwhelming. It was so much better than TV. So if any of you want it, I'll send it to you. Goes on and on. It's just really incredible. And so there's an example right there.
Mm.
All of the people who are working so hard to stay connected to others, and good time for us to look inside and keep feeding that spiritual peace. And thank you for all of your help
Oh,
in that realm.
of course. I'm in it with you all, right? Like we're all figuring this out. And I do think that turning, like I said before, turning to the Psalms, to scripture, like if lest we think that we are new to this game of feeling exiled or feeling alone, that God's people have felt this way and recorded it for generations. And so especially the Psalms is where I find comfort, partly because David is as dramatic as I am. And so I'm like, yes, the tears have been my food day and night. I
There
do
you
eat the
go.
bread of anxious toil. And so, um, but it just reminds me that we aren't alone, right? And that God has heard these prayers before, and God has been faithful still.
And last but not least, I forgot to say,
Yeah.
one day at a time. We
Yes.
have to do this one day at a time. If we start thinking of how far we have to go and what may happen between now and then, we're done for. But
That's,
and to be honest, sometimes it has to be one moment at a time.
I think
Let
that's
me
right.
stay in this moment.
That's right. That's right. We do, as I've watched a lot of Frozen 2, speaking of things that, and there's a song in
Yes.
there where Anna says, I'm just do the next right thing.
Yeah.
And so in this, we do the next right thing in that day, in that moment, and knowing that every day is going to bring something different. And we praise God that we've been given breath in our lungs to try once again, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Can I
Uh,
show everyone, Wilbur, before we
please,
go?
that'll
Because
be the the
he's
best therapy we
he's worked really hard to be a part of this.
Hi,
So
Wilbur.
Wilbur would like to say hello to everyone at First Pres. Thanks. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank
Big
you.
group.
Thank you.
Bye.